Well, thank you. Yeah, the website is Fairwinds for your listeners with an E in the middle. The industry and the NRC got together and came up with assumptions, and they are purely guesses at how much radiation can be released. And at each step along the way, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller to the point that we have very, very small evacuation zones. And that's all about money. It's all about a plan to remove people from a very close-in distance is obviously a lot cheaper than a plan to go out to, I'm suggesting, 80 kilometers.
You're suggesting 80 kilometres of evacuation zone, but how could you possibly evacuate people around Indian Point from 80 kilometres around? You've got Westchester and, highly populated areas reaching right down to New York.
Well, ever since
talk about gridlock.
Everybody has known since the 70s that locating Indian Point that close to New York City was a mistake. And yet, we're considering giving them a 20-year license extension. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It didn't make a lot of sense 40 years ago to do it, and why do we want to double down on that bet for another 20?
Well, Arnie, we know that there's a big movement now of people living around Indian Point and indeed in Manhattan to oppose Indian Point. They actually want it shut down, not the lifetime extended. Do you think that movement's going to be powerful enough with the NRC and the powers that be to do that?
Well, the NRC has never not approved a license extension.
I know.
But in the case of Indian Point, there's the state of New York is against it, and the governor of New York is against it. So for the first time, there's a political coalition that may affect whether that plant runs for an extra 20 years.
Are you going to be able to close down Vermont Yankee, seeing that your governor wants to and the Senate's voted for closing it down, and yet there's a lawsuit from Entergy who owns the blasted thing to keep it going?
Well, the people of Vermont have spoken, and that's that the unit should be shut down. Entergy is suing the state, and now it's a legal battle, and I don't really want to speculate on what a federal judge is going to decide.
No. Right in your bones, Arnie Gunderson, nuclear engineer, give us your sort of gut feeling, emotional reaction to what is now going on and has been going on in Fukushima, from all your knowledge and background and understanding.
Well, I guess there's a bunch of feelings. A deep sadness for the people off-site, an incredible respect for the workers who are risking their lives. I mean, these people know that the likelihood of a cancer is much, much increased, and yet they go to work every day. But, at its core, I feel deep respect for Mother Nature. And I have really come to the understanding that we are not smart enough to outsmart Mother Nature. There will be something thrown at a power plant that we haven't anticipated, whether it's a tsunami, an earthquake, a hurricane, a tornado, God knows what. But man is not smart enough to manage one of these, given what Mother Nature can throw at us.
So you used to think, as a nuclear engineer, that man was smart enough to master Mother Nature, did you?
Oh yeah, when I left college, the math behind nuclear power is enthralling. I mean, if now I have a saying: sooner or later, in any foolproof system, the fools are going to exceed the proofs.
Oh, that's too true, Arnie. That's too true. What we really have to do now is to rise above the wave of money and power. The last thing we haven't discussed is President Obama's absolute fixation on nuclear power. Do you want to just briefly mention?
Well, his largest campaign contributor early on was Exelon, and they have 17 nuclear power plants. So it doesn't surprise me that the advisors he chose are are pro-nuclear. I don't think he's getting good advice. The money for new nukes doesn't make any sense. They are so astronomically costly in comparison to alternative energy and smart grids that I don't know why we're doing it. On closing the old ones, I'm sure, again, that gets to the point where all of his advisors have a vested interest in that outcome.
Yeah, but wouldn't you think that man is intelligent enough, Arnie, and intuitive enough, and he's a father of 2 little daughters he adores, to really get it?
I think he relies on his advisors, and compared to an economy in the tank and 2 wars and things like that, he doesn't spend a lot of time on his energy policy. In fact, energy policy is the root of the economic problems and the root of the wars.
Yep.
But I don't think in Washington they see it that way. I think they see the energy policy as a separate deal. In fact, it's at the bottom of all our problems.
Well, I think we should close with a statement from President Jefferson that is always apt. An informed democracy will behave in a responsible fashion. And Arnie Gunderson, you are an outstanding informer, teacher, lecturer. You have been at the forefront of this dreadful, ghastly accident right from the start, and I respect you very much for that, Arnie. Without you, David Lockbaum's done great work too, but you've been right there. And I would like to say to the viewers that Arnie does it all for free. And, he's not being paid to do this, whereas the nuclear people, they get paid. So if anyone has a bit of spare cash and would like to help to save the world, it would definitely help Arnie and Maggie in the wonderful work they're doing.
Well, thank you, Helen. There's a donate button on the Fairwind site.
Yep, good. Arnie, thank you, my love. And we will be interviewing you again in a few weeks for another really ghastly update, I suppose.
Oh, I hope not.
Oh, no.
Thank you very much.
Okay, love to you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
My guest today on If You Love This Planet was Arnie Gunderson, an energy advisor with 39 years' experience of nuclear power engineering in the United States. You're listening to If You Love This Planet. Now you will hear an excerpt from a speech I gave at the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War Congress in Berlin on the 25th anniversary of Chernobyl in April 2011. I am also dedicating this lecture to my friend and sister, Petra Kelly. Petra and I worked almost hand in hand. She did Europe and I did the United States during the 1980s when the threat of nuclear war was impending, when Ronald Reagan said over an open microphone, I've pressed the button, the missile, I'm paraphrasing, missiles have been launched. I met with Reagan in the White House for an hour and a quarter. I established quickly a doctor-patient relationship with him. I held his hand for at least half that time. He knew nothing about nuclear weapons or delivery systems or CIA reports. I just finished my book, Missile Envy, and so I would correct him. He would then get a malar flush, become very anxious, so I had to hold his hand to reassure him. I estimated his IQ to be average 100, but I also came out of the meeting saying I thought he had impending Alzheimer's disease, which indeed he did. He was the Commander-in-Chief in charge of thousands of hydrogen bombs with a 3-minute decision time whether or not to launch. This is a very sad time in the history of the world. I have often imagined a major nuclear meltdown and have said for many years that that will end the nuclear industry. I never imagined 4 reactors having various stages of meltdowns built on an earthquake fault by a very capable people, the Japanese, and the fuel pools melting as well. I never imagined it.
When I first heard about it 4 weeks ago, being a physician, I extrapolated the prognosis. If indeed one or more of those reactors break through the containment and we have another Chernobyl or two Chernobyls, that will mean millions of cases of cancer in the Northern Hemisphere. How hard do we work to try and save a child's life who's dying of leukemia or Wilms tumour? How hard do we work to try and save a woman's life who's dying of metastatic breast cancer? The medical dictum says if we have an incurable disease, the only way and recourse is prevention. The nuclear industry was begun. Well, I've got a fascinating book here. It's called Radioactive, about Madame Curie and Pierre Curie. And it's relevant, I think. When they first discovered X-rays, electricity, radio, the telegraph, the X-rays and radioactivity, at the turn of the 20th century, a series of invisible forces were radically transforming daily life. The advances were dazzling. For some time they blurred the boundary between science and magic. If invisible light could pass through flesh and expose a human skeleton, was it so fantastical to believe in levitation, in telekinesis, in communicating with the dead? And this began a whole spiritualist movement in the mid-19th century, which seduced millions who were promising contact with the divine through ghosts and spirits. So we've always been fascinated with radiation, as was Madame Curie and Pierre Curie. They gave birth to death. Madame Curie died of aplastic anemia induced by radium. Pierre Curie, he was run over by a horse and buggy. Her daughter, she died of leukemia too. We have known since the beginning of the nuclear age that radiation induces cancer. However, we're in the middle of a huge argument. The problem is the nuclear physicists since the dawn of the nuclear age, and I knew many of them. They were my friends. George Kistiakowsky, who supplied the implosion mechanism for the first A-bomb, Vicky Weiskopf, Philip Morrison, Edward Teller, who I debated, and I beat him, Jerry Wiesner, who was Jack Kennedy's science advisor, Ted Taylor, who developed the suitcase hydrogen bomb. I knew them all. They were racked with guilt because they had helped to vaporize and kill over 200,000 people in a flash of light in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They thought if they could harness atoms for peace, then they could go to their graves relatively not guilty. They all went to their graves guilty. They knew right from the beginning the toxicity of plutonium. In fact, Glenn Seaborg, who developed plutonium-239, spoke about it at the beginning. Plutonium is so toxic that when injected into beagle dogs, there wasn't a dose low enough that didn't give every dog cancer, 10 to the minus 9 grams. It's said that a microgram is definitely carcinogenic, but it may be much lower. Each reactor manufactures 250 kilos of plutonium per year. It's only needed 2.5 kilos to make yourself an atomic bomb. The half-life of plutonium is 24,400 years. It lasts for 250,000 years or more. It is handled like iron by the body. It's an iron analogue. If inhaled, it induces lung cancer. And let me just point out that the nuclear industry is lying. It lies continuously. It talks about permissible doses of radiation. As we all know as physicians, there is no permissible dose of radiation. As we know as physicians, it is background radiation that induced evolution. Advantageous genes survived. Fish developed lungs. Birds developed wings. We, this magnificent species with a huge neocortex, opposing thumbs, standing on our hind legs, evolved. I have